India's hypersonic ambitions today more about prestige and than real battlefield advantage?
In 1998 conducted its nuclear test. Since then, India has embarked on this mission to carry out a significant strategic buildup of its capabilities.
Is India now shifting towards glide vehicles as a more practical option?
India conducted a test of a hypersonic technology demonstrator vehicle, which is essentially a scramjet driven missile, in 2019.
Do these technologies revive the temptation for a first strike in the South Asia?
Hypersonic weapons, in my opinion, because of their traits, they are highly accurate and thus they enable counterforce targeting. These weapons fit into the offensive weapons category and thus they are well suited for counterforce.
Since hypersonic weapons reduce the decision-making time, are future crises, do you think, are they becoming more unstable?
Then maneuverability and the retargeting, which means that adversary wouldn't know till the last moment or till the last second that which target it is going to hit.
Hello and welcome to another episode. Today we have with us Mr. Hamdan Khan, who is a global affairs analyst. Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Walaikum salam.
Thank you so much for joining. Our discussion today will largely be on your paper that has been recently published, and it is titled as Deciphering Strategic Stability in the Age of Speed, Hypersonic Weapons in South Asia. So, in this context, first of all, tell us that what exactly are hypersonic weapons and how are they different from normal ballistic and cruise missiles?
Thank you for the question. There are fundamentally two types of missiles. First type is ballistic missile, and the other type is second type is cruise missile. Ballistic missiles were initially boosted using rocket motors into the space, and they then, under the action of gravity, they return back to the Earth at pretty high speed. While the cruise missiles, they are powered throughout their flight using a different type of jet engines, and the difference in the trajectory of these two missiles is that ballistic missiles spend most of their time in space. A significant portion of their flight trajectory is in space, while the cruise missiles, because they are fitted with air-breathing engines, their flight path mostly passes through the Earth's atmosphere to suck in oxygen and thus perform the combustion. So these are two fundamentally different types of missiles. Now, normal ballistic missiles, if they are greater than 300 kilometers of range, they are hypersonic at burnout. Now I'm coming towards the hypersonic thing. And their re-entry into the atmosphere or towards their target is at high hypersonic speed, which could be around Mach 15 or Mach 20 or even Mach 25. But the normal ballistic missiles, they travel on a set parabolic trajectory, which means that they have some of these missiles might have limited terminal maneuverability, but the set parabolic trajectory means that they are more vulnerable to ballistic missile defenses. Now, this new crop of hypersonic weapons that we are discussing today, they are also of two types: hypersonic boost glide vehicles, or rather three types: hypersonic boost glide vehicles, hypersonic cruise missiles, and MARS, maneuverable reentry vehicles. Just like the ballistic missiles, they are also initially boosted into the space using rocket motors, but they have a very short ballistic phase and they straight away re-enter into the Earth's atmosphere. Then within the atmosphere, they travel at hypersonic speeds using aerodynamic lift, and ultimately they dive at their target. During their flight path through the atmosphere, they are able to make significant maneuvers, which could be horizontal, which could be vertical. And this ability, this maneuverability, makes these missiles well suited to defeat BNDs. I will be happy to share a graphic illustration that I have prepared and also included in my paper,
Yes, please.
which explains the difference between the flight paths of these missiles. Now, normal cruise missiles, they could be either subsonic or supersonic, and they normally use jet engines, or for supersonic cruise missile, they would use ramjet engines. But when it comes to hypersonic cruise missile, they would use scramjet engines, which is a very complicated technology to master.
So my next question is that during the Cold War, the nuclear powers exaggerated capabilities for deterrence and prestige. So are India's hypersonic ambitions today more about prestige and than real battlefield advantage?
Okay, so I would refer you to a book written by George Berkovich. I think it was in late 1990s, one of the seminal works of India's nuclear program. And George Berkovich argues that India's nuclear weapons development is primarily driven by international prestige. Uh,
Okay.
After that, when India in 1998 conducted its nuclear test, since then India has embarked on this mission to carry out a significant strategic buildup of its capabilities. When I say strategic buildup, it means India's buildup of nuclear as well as strategic non-nuclear weapons. They would form this strategic buildup. Uh, and
Okay.
even this buildup, in my view, is very strongly influenced by prestige. Recent evidence, if you have to look at the recent evidence, you would find you have to look at the statements of Indian Defense Ministry, which are issued after every such achievement. For example, after the ASAT test, Indians claim that they are now part of this exclusive club, and only few countries around the world has this capability. And after Merving, after hypersonic weapons test, they claim that we are now part of this exclusive hypersonic club. So, from George Berkovich's work, which suggests that India's nuclear weapon acquisition was driven by prestige, primarily by prestige, and to a lesser extent by domestic factors. The recent build-up, which includes acquisition of hypersonic weapons, also has a lot of prestige-driven agenda into it. So I agree with this proposition that India's hypersonic weapons have prestige as one of the as primary driving factor. But this is not to state that hypersonic weapons do not provide any kind of advantages on the battlefield. Their short delivery time, their precision, their accuracy, their maneuverability make them quite useful on the battlefield, especially over short and medium ranges.
Okay. So while I was reading your paper, you also highlighted the complexity of scramjet systems compared to glide vehicles. Is India now shifting towards glide vehicles as a more practical option, and could that still alter the regional balance?
Okay, so shifting may not be the right word, but what I argued in my paper was that India is now making a parallel focus on scramjet technology as well as these boost glide vehicles. In 2008, it was the first time that then DRDO chief he revealed that India has started working on scramjet engines. So, scramjet, I will just briefly explain what are the scramjet engines. What are the
Yeah.
challenges related to scramjet engines? So, first challenge for any scramjet engine is that they have the ability to self-combust, which means that it's highly challenging to sustain long scramjet operations. It is often equated with lighting a match in the hurricane and then keeping it lit. So, huge technological challenge. Then there is our heating problems and the problems of thermodynamics because normally these hypersonic cruise missiles they travel at somewhere around 20, 30 kilometers of altitude. And there the atmosphere is quite dense. And dense atmosphere means that they encounter more drag and more resistance. As a result, the body of these hypersonic missiles it becomes extremely heated up. So it's a huge technological challenge to build a structure of a missile that can sustain its body structure at such high speeds. That is another technological challenge. Now, India conducted a test of a hypersonic technology demonstrator vehicle, which is essentially a scramjet-driven missile, in 2019. It was a failure. In 2020, they conducted yet another test and claimed it to be highly successful and said that a lot of parameters worked as per their desire. But in 2023, another test was conducted, which again turned out to be a failure. And this time, it was revealed through media reports that there was a scramjet malfunction. So just relate this to the challenges that I have highlighted in the operation of a scramjet engine. In 2025, India announced that it has conducted the test of a scramjet combustor on ground, which has worked for around 1,000 seconds. So I would like to explain this that it's a whole different ball game when uh, scramjet engine is placed in a missile and it has to sustain combustion along with other technical requirements at 20 to 30 kilometers altitude. And it's a whole different ball game when a scramjet combustor is tested on ground. I'm not like trying to downplay the achievement, but fact is that it would still take India a very long way before it can come up with an operational hypersonic cruise missile. And uh, recently, the DRDO chief he revealed, and at least for me, it was a revelation that the hypersonic cruise missile program hasn't been sanctioned. So something which Indians have been working on for past like 17, 18 years, he revealed that it hasn't been sanctioned. So I think primarily it is because of technological challenges that India hasn't been able to make very fast progress in the hypersonic cruise missile domain, not because of the political constraints. And once India has this capability, has matured this capability, I don't think there would be a lot of political constraints. So, because of
Okay.
this plethora of challenges on building a hypersonic cruise missile, now my argument was that India is now making a parallel focus on less technologically complex boost glide vehicles. And as a result, the glide vehicle program is expected to make faster progress. And it is in 2024, first thrust of this boost glide vehicle was conducted. And again, recently, the DRDO chief revealed that another test would be conducted perhaps during this month, May. So now India is, while focusing on hypersonic cruise missile, but at the same time, it is because it's technologically challenging, it is now focusing also on boost glide vehicles, and perhaps in next few years, it might be able to field one hypersonic missile. Of course, that would be a BGV. Now, in response to the second part of your question, I don't think hypersonic weapons are a game changer to suddenly turn upside down the regional balance, but they do provide certain advantages which strain strategic stability in South Asia.
Okay. So you also argue that hypersonic weapons may strengthen India's counterforce posture, as you just mentioned, that they pose a certain advantages as well. Do these technologies revive the temptation for a first strike in the South Asia?
Yeah, so I think in it was in 1950s that Thomas Schelling wrote his famous book, The Strategy of Conflict. And in that book, he classified weapons based on their offensive and defensive characteristics. Uh, and as a result, he classified these weapons as good or bad. The offensive weapons would be bad, and the defensive weapons would be good. Hypersonic weapons, in my opinion, because of their traits, they are highly accurate and thus they enable counterforce targeting. Then they have terminal maneuverability, which means that they can potentially engage mobile targets as well as they can carry out retargeting. And then they are highly effective against ballistic missile defenses and thus enable more penetration ability. These weapons fit into the offensive weapons category, and thus they are well suited for counterforce. And I agree with this thing that they could potentially uh, fuel India's counterforce temptations, and thus making India more inclined towards brinkmanship.
So during the Cuban Missile Crisis, miscalculation nearly caused a nuclear war. Since hypersonic weapons reduce the decision-making time, are future crises, do you think, are they becoming more unstable?
Okay, I think the short decision-making time isn't the just one factor that contributes to crisis stability regarding hypersonic weapons. I think there are other traits. For example, this dual-use characteristic that they can be equipped with uh, uh, nuclear as well as conventional warhead. So this leads to warhead ambiguity. The adversary wouldn't know if this hypersonic weapon is coming, which warhead it's carrying. Then maneuverability and the retargeting, which means that adversary wouldn't know till the last moment or till the last second that which target it is going to hit. So combination of these factors means that if hypersonic weapons are used in a crisis, they entail high degree of crisis instability, which
The Cold War arms race triggered constant countermeasures. If India advances hypersonic systems, is Pakistan likely to respond with MIRVs and stronger second strike capabilities?
yeah, interesting question. India continuously, in my view, seeks strategic superiority vis-a-vis Pakistan. It is carrying out a huge buildup of its nuclear capability as well as of strategic non-nuclear weapons. And Pakistan, in response, has been making these what I call prudent adjustments to its force posture, to offset the impact of destabilizing impact of India's weapons buildup. It's not a classic arms race. I must clarify it over here, but prudent weapon acquisitions to deny India a definitive advantage and thus maintaining strategic balance in the region has been Pakistan's policy. And of course, second strike capability and other developments are part of that, prudent weapons acquisition or development strategy to maintain strategic stability in the region. So, in answer to your question, I would say yes, Pakistan would, as the history tells us, that Pakistan would continue to take these offsetting measures to countervail the effect of these destabilizing developments on part of India.
Okay. Some analysts also argue that hypersonic weapons may be strategically unnecessary for India. Do they truly offer something new, or are they just another costly arms race technology?
Okay, that's a really interesting question because some of these analysts happen to be good friends. So argument of these analysts has been that because India has a range of other weapon systems which can be used in the same role as hypersonic weapons, so probably the hypersonic weapons in India-Pakistan context is overkilling or superficial. Uh, but at the same time, in my view, the comparative battlefield advantages provided by hypersonic weapons should not be underestimated. So, in my view, the reality lies somewhere between the two extremes of either being superficial or being a game changer. So, they do enable certain battlefield advantages and thus train strategic stability in South Asia. But at the same time, they are not a game changer that they would suddenly provide India a trump card and Pakistan wouldn't have any option to counter it. Pakistan would have options to counter it. So I think they are not a game changer in South Asian context in that sense.
Okay. I'm heading towards the second last question, which is that your paper also suggests that hypersonic weapons could strain strategic stability in South Asia. Do they fundamentally weaken the nuclear deterrence, or are they simply the next phase of evolving military technology?
Yeah, interesting question. So strategic stability is primarily based on two pillars. It's crisis stability and then it's arms race stability. As we discussed previously, and as I mentioned, that hypersonic weapons, they increase crisis instability. At the same time, they also increase deterrence instability, and as a result, they enhance arms race instability. So, holistically speaking, these hypersonic weapons, their employment in different kinds of categories and roles, they do affect, undermine strategic stability in South Asia. And as a result, Pakistan is forced to make countervailing adjustments to its force posture to maintain this strategic balance. And of course, as I previously mentioned, that it is part of the India's larger build-up, larger strategic build-up.
So my last question is that historically, technology often advances faster than diplomacy. Is South Asia entering a phase where rapid military innovation could increase the risk of catastrophic miscalculation?
Okay, that's a really interesting question because, in my view, the diplomacy in South Asia hasn't been going anywhere for past at least more than a decade now, right? Uh, there is an absolute stalemate between the two countries. So there is no progress on CBN, there is no progress on any kind of crisis management or crisis prevention mechanism, and crises have also been occurring between the two nuclear armed neighbors, which in the absence of these crisis management and crisis prevention mechanisms means that there is high risk of escalation due to miscalculations, as you mentioned, of course, a number of other factors because of the close proximity of the two actors and stuff. I think in that context, Pakistani leadership has rightly been highlighting and stressing that this so-called limited war between the two nuclear armed countries is a non-starter, and the risk of escalation in any such endeavor are such high that that India should refrain from embarking on any such adventure or any such mission. But unfortunately, this hasn't been happening, and we see continuously a lot of provocations from other side using various premises. So yeah, at one hand, diplomacy is stalled. At one hand, and on the other hand, these technological developments are taking place at a really fast pace. So of course, it's worrisome in the context of South Asia.
Okay. Sir, I'll hear the debate here and I'll end the debate here. And thank you so much for answering all our questions regarding this topic. And I'm very sure that this conversation will be very helpful for our audiences.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the kind opportunity. Thank you. It was a
Thank you
pleasure
so much.
talking to you.